公爵夫人はゆっくり首を横に打ったので、私はそれが何とも言えず寂しかった。さあ。
The South Korean film Thehandmaiden, directed by Park Chan-wook, rebrands the materialization of femininity and masculinity as it subverts the meanings of weakness and strength and their inherent relationship to masculine and feminine definitions. Park relieves the audience's expectations of gender roles and displaces the features of traditional hero-damsel plot processes as much as its snaking ensemble shifts in perspective and tone. The emancipation of femininity, both psychologically and sexually, in this narrative triumph over predetermined biases, sets a precedent for feminist cinema of the thriller drama genre. Park adapts this narrative from British author Sarah Waters' novel Fingersmith. The original Victorian England setting transforms into this colonial Korean-era historical setting, where Fingersmith explores themes of sexual liberation and womanly desires. Handmaiden, although told by man, appropriates the male pornographic vision of desire to reconcile male voyeurism with feminist filmmaking. I think this is a very fun film to debate because there are a lot of various perspectives embedded in the film, and many of the film scenes can gather attention from both male and female gaze theories. Park tackles multiple perspectives in this crime thriller, both formally and theoretically. He employs non-linear storytelling to exemplify the consequences of patriarchal conditions, to explore both the male gaze and sexual liberation, and to touch on more modern topics of queer cinema theory. I think my favorite debate might be around Park's intentionality to display femininity in relationship to patriarchal powers. Is Park displaying a criticism or an erotic view of feminine autonomy? If we look at the roles of the killer versus the victim in this thriller film, we may begin to uncover Park's disturbance of traditional feminine versus masculine roles. At first, it might seem that he endorses traditional male killer and female victim elements, but just as the tri-chapter plot twists our understandings of the characters' relationships, it also shifts our spectators' gaze and reverts our prejudiced definitions of weakness and strength in both male and female roles. If we look at this quote about gender studies in thriller films, it reads, "The killer is with few exceptions recognizably human and distinctly male. His fury is mistakenly sexual in both roots and expression. His victims are mostly women, often sexually free and always young and beautiful." Killer Uncle Kazuki and Killer Count Fujiwara strive to dominate victim Lady Kideko. They do this both sexually and politically in order to gain her fantasized anatomy and the riches of her inherited library of rare erotic readings. Here the men are seen as strong and dominant, while the female victim is seen as weak and helpless. Park starts to set up a film that attends to male speculation and male desire. Then we can continue to look at this quote about gender and the male gaze. Within the film itself, men gaze at women who become objects of the gaze. The spectator in turn is made to identify with this male gaze and to objectify the woman on screen. And the camera's original gaze comes into play in very active filming. Lady Hideko and Suki's relationship become an object of the audience's gaze. Their sexual discoveries and intimate desires become an animation for the male audience. Or we can look at this in another way. Does Park's handling of subjects of female sexuality, domestic abuse, and normative behaviors of women recall a feminist attitude of defeating patriarchal norms, and therefore does Park actually patronize the perversion of the male gaze? Let's talk about the castration sequence. We can read this quote right here. "It is also a shared masculinity materialized in all those phallic symbols, and it's also a shared femininity materialized in what comes next, the castration, literal or symbolic, of the killer at her hands." After Uncle Kazuki leaves the house for a business trip, Lady Hideko takes Suki into her library and she destroys the books. Symbolically, she castrates Uncle Kazuki by dismembering his object of sexual perversion, which is the erotic books that the lady does for erotic readings. This film now performs a switch of the character roles, and it is Lady Hideko and Suki who take on this role of the female victim hero. The adult world requires strength, and therefore Park reverts our prejudices of the traditional strong male position and the weak female character. Suki and Lady Hideko reach victory, and their incipient masculinity is realized by the male audience. This shift is underwritten by the plot and by camera position. Park understands and infuses this idea that gender is a permeable membrane, and this crime thriller presents an ode to women's power, desire, and autonomy.